Being the 14th installment of the long heritage of Tsuburaya Productions, Ultraman Gaia the series truly is a remarkable piece of art. This is simply because its creators beautifully kept all the pieces that make for an Ultraman series, while making small but significant tweaks that kept the show both interesting and entertaining at the same time. Ultraman Gaia was a series that aired from 1998 to 1999 and is the third Ultraman of the Heisei era of Ultras, which in very simple terms mean the second generation of Ultraman. So firstly, let's get into what the series did that kept it classic. Typically, every Ultraman series, up to that point and a little beyond, contained certain elements that are traditionally applied in the saga, and Ultraman Gaia was no exception. Some of them include the presence of a special task force to combat monsters, aliens, and similar threats, love interests of the main and supporting characters, the crashing fighter jets that get timely saved by the hero, the captain or commander finding out the human identity of the Ultra before most, if not all, the characters of the series, a dashing battle between the Ultra and an imitation or Dark Ultra, and last but not least, a defeat close to the finale of the series. There are certainly more classic elements in the series, but the point is, the show most definitely adheres to those traditions. So for the next part, I want to briefly go through some of the more obvious differences that were implemented in the series, and definitely mentioned by other reviewers and critics. This is where the innovative part kicks in. The main characters, Gamu, who is Gaia, and Fujimiya, who is Agul, are the first of their kind. Quite typically, the human hosts are played by characters who are already members of a special task force, in this case XIG, and normally have some form of basic fighting skills, are able to pilot a ship, have learned combat tactics, and are trained for battle. But these two characters are scientists. Gamu becomes the analyst of XIG. His job is to discover the weakness of the kaijus and battle strategies to combat the various complicated threats. At the time this series was made, there were no previous human hosts who played such a role. Before being recruited, Gamu was just a 20-year-old university student, which also made him the youngest human host of his time. The series does occasionally remind us that Gamu is very junior in comparison to his peers. For instance, in the early part of the series, the commander sends him home in order for Gamu to tell his parents of his new job. As for Fujimiya, he too is a scientific genius, who eventually becomes a wanted criminal. To make things more interesting, he plays the role of an anti-hero who always clashes with Gamu. We'll get more into his character a little later. Another obvious thing that gets pointed out often is the contrasting colors of the Ultras. Gaia being red and silver and Agul being blue and black. In the second half, however, the contrasting colors are not so obvious anymore, as Gaia has a small plate of black on his chest as version 2, and Agul loses the black for grey and a little yellow plate as version 2. So it's more appreciable in the first half of the series, but the red and blue being opposites is still there. Other miscellaneous things include the presence of multiple teams for multiple functions, for instance Team Lightning, Falcon and Crow as the Air Force, a land tank team called Team Hercules, a rescue team named Team Seagull, and the marine team, Team Marlin. The aerial base, the multiple use of foreigners to give the show a more international touch, incidents happening outside of Japan that made the series a lot more realistic, and a few more are things to be noted of. Now let's get into the less obvious innovations Tsuburaya Productions brought into the series. One of the things I realized was the initial office politics that Gamu had to endure when first joining XIG. Characters like Kazuo, the head of Team Lightning, was initially very hard on Gamu since he began learning to fly and also since he wasn't a fighter like the rest of them. Even Atsuko would eventually sort of become his love interest, treats him in a rather mean way when he first enrolls. He is also initially seen eating in the cafeteria alone for the initial part of the series. But in quite contrast to this, some of the other field members of XIG become close to Gamu relatively fast and build strong bonds with him rather quickly. Something really obvious but also I believe small that I took note of was the first and third opening. In the first, the two ultras are not in the same direction, whereas in the third they are, symbolically representing their differences in philosophy in the first half of the series and their unity once Agul returns in episode 41. Next, their identities being revealed to the world was also something that had not been done in the past and rarely in consecutive series. What I found a little more subtly beautiful was the heroism displayed by the characters other than XIG members. We get to see the KCB reporters' bravery throughout the series, along with other characters like Gamu's father and his friends. In our next video, we'll get into the role of Fujimiya in the series and why I believe he was a big contributor to the success of the show, the good monster element of the series that was emphasized, and why the finale was just remarkable. Well, that's about it. Thank you for tuning in to today's video. If you have any requests for future videos, please write them down in the comments. And I also appreciate feedback to deliver better content in the future.